Well, this is the third of my new videos, and I'm going to start with a short recap of where we've come so far. In the first video, I took up the theme from my previous 6 videos, Metaphysics and Ultimate Reality. And what I said was that our task is to look for an account of ultimate reality. I don't even know what an account of ultimate reality would be. I don't even know if it makes sense. That was one possibility I considered, the thought, the later Wittgenstein, that this is all ultimately nonsensical. So it's possibly best to keep in mind that the question isn't what is ultimate reality, it is what is an account of ultimate reality. And all the options are open. We have no idea. I mean, I raised some points relating to sort of my favourite philosophers: Kant, Hegel, Heidegger, Schopenhauer, Wittgenstein. But the options are open. But the first video that I did asked about the question of purpose. Can we say that ultimate reality is in some sense purposeful, has an end, has a point? And I talked about a dilemma between 2 different ways of conceiving of the universe from the ultimate standpoint. One is that it does have some kind of a purpose. It could either be God-given, or it could be purposeful in some more general, less defined sense, in the way the pre-Socratics thought it. Or there is no purpose. It is just brute fact. It is just something that just came into existence or has always existed, that has no ultimate account besides the account that science and physics can give. And that's a dilemma for me, especially not because I'm someone wrangling with the problems of ethics or searching for God, or asking whether I should have some kind of religious faith. It is specifically a problem for someone who thinks there may be such a thing as giving an account of ultimate reality. I feel it. I feel that there is something very wrong in the idea that science has the last word. And I don't accept that religion can step in either. I talked about this in my video, The Locked Corridor. There has to be a third way. A way in which we can somehow orient ourselves towards the idea that there's a question to be asked, even if we can't answer it, even if it's ultimately just a conundrum. So starting from that point, the dilemma, either a universe that has an ultimate purpose or a universe that doesn't have an ultimate purpose. In the second video, I looked at 3 moves that one could make to try to wriggle out of the dilemma. The first move I called Satanism, and it's the idea that there is a God, but it's a finite God, an immensely powerful being to whom we give our allegiance, but we could, in principle, rebel, kill the God, and replace it with another God, maybe with the aid of another God. This is all real in the sense that these actually are things that have happened in human history. Before the rise of the monotheistic religions, starting with Judaism, but possibly Zoroastrianism, I'll beat them to the post. The idea has been that no finite, no limited deity would be sufficient. And there's the fatal flaw in Satanism, that it's really just giving us more of the same. I mean, apart from the distaste at the thought that there's something great about buying before some greater power, just for the sake of, whatever the gifts they promise us. You didn't give us enough, so we're going to get a different God who gives us more, or whatever. It's just ridiculous. But I'm not going to lambast Satanists because I don't know enough about Satanism. And as far as I'm concerned, all religions have a claim. Scientology has a claim. I'm not going to make any kind of case that somehow the religions that are main stage are somehow got greater claim to the truth. But Satanism has this problem, that it's limited, that it just offers more of the same. And the second move is like totally different from this. It basically says, well, if I'm unhappy about there being an infinite power directing things, who knows the whole story? And if I'm also unhappy about just being some arbitrary piece of the fabric of the universe, well, the third alternative is I must be God. And this is the position of solipsism. I am the God of my own universe. I'm the God of my own reality. And the problem I found with this was that it has a fatal flaw in respect to the very concept of reality, because there's no difference between reality and a dream. Something you make up as you go along. You can change any truth to falsehood or falsehood to truth. And then the third alternative was to say, oh, forget all this. Let's not even bother about searching for meaning or searching for purpose. Let's just live for the moment. Let's just enjoy ourselves. And I call this nihilism. And of course, you don't have to be a nihilist to be a hedonist. You can be a hedonist who genuinely believes that human pleasures and pains are the ultimate value. And John Stuart Mill basically argued this in his essay Utilitarianism. But then he went on to talk about higher and lower pleasures, and soon you began to realize that he isn't just talking about states of pleasure, but rather expressions of human individuality and the best that human beings can do. And now we're not really in the ballpark of hedonism at all, we're somewhere else. Something closer to Nietzsche, in fact. So we have these three alternatives, and they're unsatisfactory, and then we have the dilemma. The three alternatives were intended to resolve the dilemma, but they haven't, so the dilemma is still there. But I now want to go back to a point that was raised about the first video. A questioner talked about the multiverse. And the multiverse is a very tempting idea, and there's massive discussion of it now, on the internet and everywhere else. And one of the reasons for its popularity is it's really easy to understand. I first came across the idea actually back in the 80s. There was an American computer scientist, I think he was a computer scientist, called Marvin Minsky. And Marvin Minsky said, well look, you don't need a God, because all possible worlds are real. You only need a God if there's some selection made, as Leibniz thought this is the best of all possible worlds. But if all possible worlds are real, if every single possibility is realized in actuality, then no creator is required, because a possible world exists by necessity, simply by virtue of logic. Well, the idea of the multiverse isn't that, and I've had numerous sort of attempts to explain to my students who are taking the Pathways program, the Possible World Machine, that the multiverse isn't all possible worlds. It's only a restricted set of possible worlds, namely those you get when there's a choice between two alternative states, where quantum mechanics says that both are possible. And in the Everett interpretation of quantum mechanics, two worlds come into being. So you could picture the universe, the multiverse, as a branching tree, starting with the Big Bang. Now, in this branching tree, there will be a lot of possibilities that never are realized. For example, the possibility that I have two heads. There is no way, starting from the Big Bang, Well, actually, I don't know. I have no idea whether there is or isn't. But there will be plenty. I mean, it seems extremely unlikely, given what we know about evolution and so on. But it seems logically possible that I could have two heads. It seems logically possible that all sorts of things, you could travel faster than the speed of light and so on. Not in the multiverse. In the multiverse, that's one of the things, the laws of physics are fixed. But then we can take that starting point and say, well, consider all the possible starting points and all the trees that grow from that. And then, the final stage, let's consider variations in the laws of nature. How many variations are we prepared to permit? And then there's all sorts of debate about, which are the fundamental laws, and the idea of symmetry and supersymmetry, and there are only certain laws that are logically possible, and so on. And maybe you get even more worlds from that. And maybe with enough ingenuity you could actually somehow get all logically possible worlds. I don't know. Well, is that a solution? To say, let's forget about the technical details. Let's just consider the question whether it helps in any way to think that this world is just one of an immense number of possible worlds. And that if we're looking for an explanation of why this world is the way it is, well, we don't need any. Because every possibility is realized. Why did the Twin Towers fall? In another universe, the Twin Towers didn't fall. Why did human beings descend from apes? In another universe, human beings didn't descend from apes. Why is there the Earth? Well, in another universe, another part of the multiverse, or another possible world, the solar system was never formed, and so on. Well, in the first unit of the Possible World Machine, each of these 15 units has a short story and a couple of dialogues, and one of the dialogue is always a fictional philosophy classroom, an evening class. And actually they're based on the evening classes that I once gave for the Workers' Educational Association. And so they're kind of a loose connection between the characters in these dialogues who appear again and again, and actual students that I taught. And the lecturer, Sam Phillips, named after Elvis Presley's manager, he's a bit like me. He's kind of better than me. He's sharper. But then, of course, I'm able to anticipate objections and so on, and he always comes up with the right answer, whereas I never did. Well, I sometimes did, but as often as not, I didn't. Well, okay, possible worlds, and there's a discussion of why would anyone believe in possible worlds? I mean, apart from physics, and in philosophy, there's a philosopher called David Lewis, who gave a semantic argument for possible worlds, which was very clever. And it basically said, we believe that certain kinds of conditional statements are true. The statements in question are called contrary to fact or counterfactual, because they talk about what might have happened if certain circumstances had been different. If I'd had work on my desk to do today, I would not have made this video. And that's because I'm very responsible. I always do necessary work first, and then play comes later. Is that true? Well, yeah, I claim it to be true. But what does its truth consist in? Because here I am giving a video, and I'm talking about a world where I didn't give a video, or a possibility where I didn't give a video. How do we know? We can't look at it. What are we saying? And what Lewis said was, look, if this can be true, then we must be talking about an actually existing possible world, or set of possible worlds, in which Jeffrey Klempner had work on his desk on Tuesday morning, 28th of April, I think it's the 28th, and so he didn't make a video. Well, there are some possible worlds where I did make a video, because I made the video first, or I did the work in a hurry, but the most likely, alternative is, which is what I would usually do, is I did the work and I went out for my walk. You can only, gumption will only stretch so far. And I prefer to be completely fresh when I do something like this. So that's the most likely alternative. So Lewis said, in the closest possible worlds, the worlds that are most like our actual world, I don't make the video. And the punchline is this. People use counterfactuals all the time. And they assert them. They make claims. And a claim is a claim to truth. And truth implies that there is something to make it true. And the only viable truth maker for counterfactual conditionals is possible worlds which actually exist, each in its own space and time. So, getting back to Unit 1 of the Possible World Machine, the students are kind of hotly debating this, and some think it's a ridiculous metaphysical idea, and I'll get the point about truth. And then I have Sam Phillips at the end of the class raising a completely off-the-wall objection that has nothing to do with the discussion that went before, but it's one that just occurs to me, which is that this basically. Watching the news and a rescue scenario. And we're all desperately hoping that these people can be saved, whatever it is. It's an earthquake, an avalanche, a bomb, terrorist bomb thing, or whatever. And we want the rescuers to succeed. And we are so glad when the rescuers, when the victims of the avalanche have been brought out safe and well. But we have no reason to be glad, because if all possible worlds are equally real, in another possible world they weren't brought out safe and well, they died. Everything that is good in this world will be bad in some other world. And if you think of things that are just bad, imagine the very, very worst thing that could ever happen, and then multiply it by 1,000 or 1,000,000. Because if it's logically possible, then there's an actual world where this is happening. And this blows my mind. It's one thing to say, well, okay, but there are compensating worlds where we're really, really wonderful. But I don't know, it's something to do with my mindset, but it's great to think that there are worlds which are really wonderful, and every human being on Earth is blissfully happy. But somehow it just doesn't cut it for me. Because I'm more concerned with suffering. The thought of the incredibly awful and terrible suffering that is logically possible. And if you believe that all possible worlds are real, then you have to believe and feel for all that terrible suffering, that unbelievable suffering. And of course, the guy who invented the idea in the first place, Leibniz, it doesn't touch him at all, because his point was God chose the best of all possible worlds, and it may seem to a lot of people unlikely, but at least there's some kind of a stop. At least there's the thought that okay, things are bad, but they're not that bad. They could never get that bad. Maybe they could, but then that's there'd have to be a very good reason. Well, is that an argument? Is that a good argument? This is the point that I was really trying to make, because it's Unit 1 of an Introduction to Philosophy course, and we're learning about logic, and a good argument is one that relies on logic and is persuasive and makes a case. How can what we feel about a conclusion, the emotions that we have when we contemplate a particular philosophical view, how can that possibly be an argument? The whole point of philosophy is that you're supposed to be rational. And I wanted to raise this issue in Unit 1. As it happens, it does strike me as a problem. I haven't seen it discussed anywhere. Maybe it has been. But I would say that people who somehow find the idea that all possible worlds are real a relief, people like Marvin Minsky, who say, oh well, great, we don't need a God, all this is real, ought to be wringing their hands in sorrow at the thought of all the terrible suffering that actually exists in the multiverse. That has taken us on a little bit. I'm not sure where the investigation is going to go from here, but we'll find out in the next video. Bye for now.